The lamp gutters in the draught of the campaign tent, throwing a pale, wavering light across a wax tablet upon which the Emperor of Rome is writing in Greek slowly in the small hours, while outside the river, Granua runs cold and black past the picket lines. He is in his 50s, sleeping poorly, in indifferent health, and he has just lost a friend to the plague, which has followed the legions north from the Parthian campaign. He writes, for himself only, a sentence which begins, "The universe is change, life is opinion." And then he stops, because somewhere in the dark, beyond the rampart, a sentry has begun to cough, and the Emperor, who is also a man, sets down the stylus and listens. What he was writing, on that night, or some night very like it, in the winter quarters of the campaign against the Quadi and the Marcomanni, would not be read by any other living person for more than 1,000 years. It carried no title. It addressed no audience. The book we now call the Meditations. He called simply to eis hauton, to himself, or things to oneself. They are notes. They are reminders. They are the private exercises of a man who held more worldly power than any other human being then alive, and who had concluded by some long road of reading and grief that this power was very nearly nothing. Tonight, we will sit with him by that lamp. We will read what he wrote, and we will consider why, with armies under his command and the title Imperator before his name, he should have spent his nights instructing himself again and again in his own smallness. The principle he is practicing in those nocturnal pages has many names. The Stoics called it, among other things, the view from above. Theoria, the act of looking. The deliberate setting of one's own affairs, one's own grievances, one's own ambitions, against the scale of the cosmos itself, so that they may be seen at their true size. It is not the only Stoic exercise. It is perhaps not even the most famous, but it is the one to which Marcus returns most often, more often than any other single practice in the entire notebook, and it is the one we will take as our subject. Hear the principle in his own words, as George Long rendered them in the 19th century from the Greek. Thou hast power over thy mind, not outside events. Realize this, and thou wilt find strength. That is one statement of it. Here is another, more pointed, which appears in the 9th book. Think of the whole of existence, of which thou art the smallest part. Think of the whole of time, of which a brief and momentary portion has been assigned to thee, and of fate, of which how small a part thou art. And again, in the 4th book, perhaps the clearest of all, look round at the courses of the stars, as if thou wert going along with them, and constantly consider the changes of the elements into one another. For such thoughts purge away the filth of the earthly life. Purge away the filth of the earthly life. Notice what the exercise is meant to do. It is not meant to make him grand. It is not meant to inflate him with the dignity of belonging to the cosmos. It is meant, on the contrary, to wash from him the residue of self-importance, the accumulated film of taking himself too seriously, which the conditions of his life were perfectly designed to deposit upon him every waking hour. Consider what those conditions were. He had been adopted into the imperial line as a boy. He had been addressed as Caesar from his teens. He had been schooled by the finest rhetoricians in the empire, surrounded by attendants whose function was in part to anticipate his moods. He was the emperor. When he entered a room, men stood. When he gave a judgment, it became law. When he raised his hand on the rostrum, legions moved across rivers. A man in such a position, the Stoics held, is in spiritual danger of a particular and acute kind. He is in danger of believing himself to be the figure his circumstances reflect back to him. He is in danger of mistaking the deference of others for an accurate account of his own importance. He is in danger, in short, of forgetting that he is a brief animal upon a small planet in an indifferent cosmos, and that the purple of his cloak is a dye extracted from a sea snail and applied to wool that will, like the snail and like the man, decompose. The view from above is the corrective. It is the practice, undertaken deliberately and repeatedly, of imagining oneself from a great height, from the perspective of the stars, from the perspective of the centuries, from the perspective of geological time, until the matters which had seemed to require one's outraged attention are seen as they are, which is to say, briefly, partially, and at a scale entirely incommensurate with the size of the universe in which they occur. To understand why Marcus needed this exercise so badly, we should place him where he was when he wrote most of the Meditations. Not in Rome, not in the marble corridors of the Palatine. He was on the northern frontier of the empire, in what is now Austria and Slovakia and the Czech lands, conducting a long, grinding, miserable war against confederations of Germanic peoples, whom the Romans called the Quadi, the Marcomanni, and the Iazyges. The war had begun in the late 160s, when these peoples crossed the Danube in force. They had broken into Italy itself. They had besieged the city of Aquileia. The reverberation of that event in the Roman imagination is difficult for us to reconstruct. No barbarian army had threatened Italian soil in this manner for centuries. The Senate, which had grown used to thinking of the Danube as a far-off limit beyond which troubles were managed by competent legates, found that the limit had moved. Marcus took the field himself. He was not by temperament a soldier. He had been a scholar, a student of philosophy from boyhood, a man who, as a young Caesar, had written to his teacher Fronto with the small confidences of a bookish son. His letters from those earlier years survive, and they show a thoughtful, somewhat anxious young man, fond of his family, slow to anger, given to careful reading. He was not the figure one would have chosen, looking at him at 20, to lead an army. And yet he led. He went north. He spent the better part of the last decade of his life in camps along the Danube, in places whose Latin names we know imperfectly: Carnuntum, Vindobona, Sirmium, moving with the seasons, wintering with the troops, conducting the diplomatic and military business of a frontier war. His health was indifferent. The ancient sources, particularly the Historia Augusta, which is unreliable on many things but consistent on this, describe him as physically frail. He ate sparingly. He took some kind of remedy, possibly containing opium, possibly merely a digestive draught, which his physician Galen prescribed for chest pains and stomach troubles. He slept poorly. The northern winters were not kind to him, and throughout these years, the Antonine Plague, which we now believe to have been smallpox, brought back by Lucius Verus's legions from the Eastern Campaign, moved through the empire and through the army. It killed an estimated 5 million people across the Mediterranean world. It killed soldiers in his camp. It killed civilians in cities he would never see. It killed, eventually, his co-emperor and adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, on the road home from one of the early campaigns. It would kill, the sources suggest, Marcus himself in the year 180 at Vindobona, or perhaps at Sirmium. Picture him then in the winter camp. Picture the tent, the wax tablet, the lamp, the cold beyond the canvas, the cough of the sentry, the smell of horses and damp wool, and the latrine pits beyond the rampart. Picture the dispatches arriving from Rome, with news of the Senate's bickering, of factions, of grain shortages, of someone's death, of someone's marriage. Picture the petitioners who, even in a frontier camp, found their way to him, asking for judgments, for favors, for justice. He had no privacy. The Emperor of Rome has no privacy. He had perhaps a few hours in the night, when the camp was as quiet as a camp ever is, and the lamp burned, and he could open the tablet and write. What he wrote again and again was the view from above. Asia and Europe are corners of the universe, every sea, a drop in the universe. Mount Athos, a little clod of the universe, every present moment of time, a point in eternity. All things are little, changeable, perishable. That is the sixth book. Hear it as he must have heard it himself, sitting in the tent, surrounded by the apparatus of an empire he commanded. Asia and Europe are corners of the universe. He, the master of those corners, was practicing the discipline of seeing them as corners. Why did he need this? Why so often? The notebook contains the exercise in dozens of variations, returned to compulsively, as one returns to a wound. The answer, I think, is that the conditions of his life were perfectly designed to undo it. Every morning, attendants dressed him. Every morning, men addressed him by titles that implied his centrality to the cosmos: Augustus, Imperator, Pontifex Maximus. Every dispatch he opened began with elaborate forms of address. Every judgment he gave was received as if it were the judgment of Providence itself. A man under such conditions either becomes monstrous or he develops a counter-practice. Marcus developed the counter-practice. In the second book, written according to the heading preserved in the manuscripts among the Quadi at the Granua, that is, in the very campaign we are imagining, he begins with the famous passage, "Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial. All these things happen to them by reason of their ignorance of what is good and evil." Notice the move. He is the emperor. He could, with a word, have any of these people removed from his presence. He could have them flattered into silence or punished into compliance. He chooses instead to remind himself that they are his kin, that they share in reason, that they cannot harm him, that he is no more entitled to be free of them than they are entitled to be free of him. And then, a little further on in the same book, "Though thou shouldst be going to live 3,000 years, and as many times 10,000 years, still remember that no man loses any other life than this which he now lives, nor lives any other than this which he now loses." He is reminding himself, in a winter camp on a frontier, while running an empire and a war and his own failing body, that the life he has is short, that the life anyone has is short, and that this fact should govern his estimation of his own importance. Consider the practice in operation. A petitioner arrives. He is irritating. He repeats himself. He flatters clumsily. He wants something Marcus cannot grant, or should not grant. In the moment of irritation, and Marcus, we know from his own admissions, was a man capable of irritation, the practice intervenes. "Look at the stars," he tells himself, "as though thou wert moving with them." The petitioner is a brief creature. Marcus is a brief creature. The empire is a brief arrangement of brief creatures. The stars do not know they exist. The exercise does not make the petitioner less irritating, but it relocates the irritation. It places it where it belongs, which is in the small theater of a single afternoon, on a single frontier, in a single century, on a single planet, in a cosmos which contains, the Stoics held, an unimaginable number of such theaters, none of them final. And so the irritation does not become wrath. The emperor does not become tyrant. The petitioner goes away with his answer, fair or unfair, but not destroyed. This, I believe, is what the Meditations show us more than anything else. They show us a man practicing, with grim discipline, the art of not becoming what his position invited him to become. He could have been Caligula. He could have been Nero. He could have been Domitian. The structural temptations were the same. He was not, and the notebook is, in part, the record of how he was not. Let us look at one more passage, perhaps the most striking, from the 7th book. Many grains of frankincense on the same altar. One falls before, another falls after, but it makes no difference. That is the whole entry. He has written nothing more. The image is enough. Many grains of frankincense fall onto the altar. Some fall sooner, some fall later. The smoke rises, the grains are gone. The ceremony continues, or it does not. The altar remains, or it does not. The temple, the city, the empire, the planet, the star, all of it, eventually gone. He is one grain. He is writing this in a campaign tent, on a frontier, as the Emperor of Rome. He is one grain. This is not despair. This is the discipline. The grain that knows itself to be a grain does not insist that the altar exists for its sake. The grain that knows itself to be a grain falls when it falls, and the falling is not a tragedy, because the grain was never the center. Now consider what he was doing in his actual conduct during these years on the frontier, and you will see how the practice bore weight in his decisions. When the treasury ran short, he did not raise taxes on the provinces. He auctioned the imperial household's own goods, jewels, furniture, his wife's silk garments, in the Forum of Trajan over the course of 2 months to fund the war. The ancient sources record this with some astonishment. An emperor selling his own dishes to pay his soldiers. The view from above had taught him perhaps that the dishes were dishes. When Avidius Cassius, his general in the east, declared himself emperor in 175 on a false rumor that Marcus had died, Marcus did not begin a vengeful campaign. He prepared, reluctantly, to march east. Cassius was killed by his own officers before Marcus arrived. Marcus, on reaching the eastern provinces, declined to punish the cities that had supported the usurpation. He burned, the sources say, the correspondence that would have identified the conspirators, refusing even to read it. He did not wish to know who his enemies had been. The view from above does not require such mercy, but it makes such mercy possible. The man who has placed his own dignity in the scale of the cosmos has less of it to defend. I will not pretend that Marcus was without fault. He was a slaveholder, as nearly every Roman of his class was. He authorized the persecution of Christians in his reign, or permitted it to continue under existing law. The scholarship is divided on the degree of his personal involvement, but the persecutions occurred, and he did not stop them. He chose his son, Commodus, as successor, breaking with the practice of his immediate predecessors who had adopted capable men from outside their families, and Commodus proved disastrous. These are facts. The notebook does not exempt him from them. The practice of the view from above does not make a man infallible. It makes him perhaps less convinced of his own infallibility, which is a different thing. The episode is not litigating these matters. It notes them and moves on, because the principle we are studying does not depend on the perfection of the man who studied it. It depends on whether the principle is sound. What, then, is Marcus actually teaching us? He is teaching first that self-importance is the default condition of the human animal, and that it must be corrected deliberately and repeatedly by an exercise of attention. We do not naturally see ourselves as small. We see ourselves as central. Every sensation we have arrives in the first person. Every memory is ours. Every desire is ours. The structure of consciousness itself conspires to place us at the center of the universe, and the world, through its various deferences and slights, confirms or denies our centrality with such intensity that we come to mistake the question of our centrality for the most important question there is. The view from above is the practice of stepping outside this. Not once, not in a moment of insight, repeatedly, as often as the original error returns, which is constantly. He is teaching, second, that this practice is not cold. It is not nihilism. It is not the conclusion that nothing matters because we are small. Read him carefully, and you will see that he does not draw that conclusion. He draws, on the contrary, the conclusion that because we are small, the brief time we have should be spent in accordance with our nature, which is rational and social. Because we are grains of frankincense, we should burn well while we burn. Because we are part of the cosmos, we should act in accordance with its order. The smallness is not a license for indifference. It is a reason for proportion. He is teaching, third, that the practice is available to anyone, regardless of station. He was the emperor. He needed it. The petitioner before him was perhaps a freedman, or a soldier, or a provincial. They needed it too. The exercise does not require imperial circumstances. It requires only the capacity to imagine oneself from a great height and to allow that imagination to correct the testimony of one's daily life. He is teaching, fourth, that the practice is for the practitioner alone. The notebook was private. It was not addressed to us. He was not writing to instruct posterity. He was writing to instruct himself. The view from above is not a position one announces. It is not a posture one performs. It is a private correction conducted in the small hours, in whatever the equivalent of the campaign tent is in one's own life, by lamplight, when no one is watching. And he is teaching, finally, and this is the hardest part of the lesson, that the practice is never completed. The notebook returns to it again and again, book after book, year after year. He does not arrive at a permanent vantage point from which he sees himself, once and for all, as small. He arrives there briefly and then loses it, and then arrives there again and loses it again. The notebook is not the record of a man who has achieved the view from above. It is the record of a man who keeps returning to it. Who knows he will need to return to it tomorrow? Who knows perhaps that he will need to return to it on the last day of his life, when the smallness will by then be obvious to him in a way it had not been before. This is what makes Marcus a serious teacher, and not merely a quotable one. He does not promise that the practice will become unnecessary. He does not promise that one day the self-important voice will fall silent. He says simply, "This is the exercise. Do it. Do it again. Do it tomorrow. The cosmos will be there. So will you for a while. Make use of the relation." The lamp, we may imagine, burns low. The emperor closes the tablet. He has written perhaps a few lines tonight. Tomorrow there will be dispatches. Tomorrow there will be a council with his generals. Tomorrow there will be petitioners. Tomorrow there will be news from somewhere of a death. Tomorrow there will, with luck, be another night, another tent, another lamp, another tablet. He lies down on the camp bed. He is not a young man. He may be wondering, as men in their 50s do, how many such nights remain. The notebook does not record this wondering directly, but it records, often, the awareness of mortality. Thou mayest depart from life this very moment. That is from the second book. Let this thought be present to thee in everything thou doest, sayest, and thinkest. He sleeps, or he does not. Outside the tent, the river runs cold and black. The stars wheel above the Danube as they have wheeled above every river since rivers began. The grains of frankincense fall, one after another, onto the altar of whatever century is theirs. I leave you with this question, which Marcus did not ask in these words, but which the entire notebook is, in a sense, an answer to. When you next find yourself wounded by someone's neglect, or inflated by someone's praise, or convinced that the matter before you is the matter upon which everything turns, will you remember, even for a moment, to look up, not to dismiss what is before you, not to deny that it is yours and real and yours to attend to, but to place it, for one breath, in the scale at which it is occurring, the scale of the stars, which do not know your name, the scale of the centuries, which will not remember it, the scale of the cosmos, of which you are, as Marcus reminded himself, in a tent on the Danube, the smallest part. The practice does not require that you stay there. It requires only that you visit, as often as the visit is needed, which, if you are honest, is often. Good night, then, from the camp on the frontier. The lamp is out. The emperor sleeps, or tries to. The notebook waits for tomorrow.